Welcome back to the Slow Almanac. I'm Ali. Tonight we wander together, slowly, to a place where nothing is in a hurry, and neither are we. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, take a moment to subscribe before we begin. That way the next slow story will find you on Sunday night. Let your body settle. Let the day fall back a little. Whatever it held, let it sit at the edge of the room for now. You don't need to carry it in here. Tonight we are going north, to a narrow arm of the sea, pressed between walls of dark rock, on a coast where the winters are long and the light arrives late and leaves early. The water is very still. The walls go up a long way. There is almost no sound. If your eyes are open, let them close. If your shoulders are raised, let them go. There is nothing here that needs you to be alert. You are standing at the edge of a small fjord on a northern coast. The water in front of you is dark, not black, but a deep, cold blue-gray, the color of the sky just after the last of the light has gone. It is flat, completely flat. There is no wind this evening, and the surface of the fjord holds the last of the pale sky like a sheet of hammered tin. You can see the reflection of the far wall in it, the rock face on the opposite shore, perhaps half a mile away, mirrored in the water below, so that the world appears to be twice as tall as it is. The fjord is narrow here. At its widest point, you could cross it in a small boat in 10 minutes. At its narrowest, the walls press in until the strip of sky overhead is no wider than a road. But it is deep, very deep. The water beneath your feet, if you could measure it, would be over 200 meters from surface to floor, deeper than the open sea just outside the fjord's mouth. You are standing on the edge of something that goes a long way down. The walls on either side rise almost vertically. On your left, the rock face begins at the waterline. There is no beach, no gradual slope, just stone going straight into the water, and it climbs in one long sweep to a ridgeline far above. The rock is dark gray, almost charcoal in this light. In places it is streaked with pale minerals, thin veins of lighter stone running diagonally across the face. In places it is smooth, polished to a faint sheen. In other places it is rough, and the roughness has a pattern to it. Long, shallow grooves, running more or less horizontal, as if something enormous had drawn its fingers across the rock. We will come back to those grooves. There is time, The wall on your right is similar, though it catches the last of the evening light a little differently. There, the rock is tinged faintly gold near the top, where the sun has just left it, and the gold fades to gray as your eye travels down toward the waterline. There are patches of lichen on the upper faces, flat, circular, orange and gray, very slow growing. The lichen has been there for a long time. Below the lichen, where the rock gets less sun and more moisture, there is moss, dark green, very soft, growing in the crevices and the horizontal ledges. Behind you, the fjord narrows into a valley. The valley is U-shaped, broad and flat at the bottom, with steep walls on either side, the walls curving gently inward at their base before rising sharply. It is the kind of valley that looks like it was made with a very large, very slow tool, which it was. The floor of the valley is flat and green, and there is a small river running down the middle of it, making almost no sound. The river is thin now, late in the year, after a dry autumn. It moves slowly, spreading wide over a bed of rounded stones. The stones are all the same, smooth, gray, oval. They have been smoothed by the river over many years, but they were brought here by something older and larger than the river. At the far end of the valley, above the ridgeline, there is a faint smear of white, a remnant snowfield caught in a hollow on the high ground, where the sun doesn't reach long enough to melt it even in summer. It is small now. It was not always small. The water of the fjord is cold. You don't need to touch it to know that. You can feel it in the air just above the surface, a faint chill rising, the kind of cold that has been held in deep water since winter and hasn't quite let go. In summer, the top few meters warm a little, enough for the light to filter down and turn the surface a pale, translucent green. But below that, the water is the same temperature it has been for a long time. 4 degrees. 5. Still, salt water. The fjord is open to the sea at its outer end, where the walls eventually lower and spread apart, and the water widens into a bay. The tides move in and out, very gently, twice a day, raising and lowering the surface of the fjord by perhaps a meter. At high tide, the water line on the rock walls is marked by a faint dark line, a thin stripe of algae living at exactly the level the sea reaches. Below that line, the rock is always wet. Above it, the rock dries between tides. You are standing just above the tide line. The rock under your feet is rough and slightly damp, and it is cold through the soles of your shoes. Let me describe it again, in a slightly different way. You are at the edge of a narrow arm of the sea, pressed between walls of dark rock on a northern coast. The water is flat and very deep. The walls rise almost straight up on either side. Behind you, a broad valley opens out, smooth-floored and steep-sided, with a thin river at its center and a remnant of snow on the high ground at its far end. The rock around you is old, very old. It was here long before the sea was here. long before the valley was this shape. What shaped it? The valley, the walls, the floor beneath the water, was ice. Ice that came and went many times over a very long period. Ice that is mostly gone now, but left its record in the stone. The grooves on the wall to your left, those long, shallow scratches running horizontal across the rock face, are part of that record. The smoothed, polished surfaces are part of it too. The rounded stones in the riverbed behind you, the U-shape of the valley, the extraordinary depth of the water, all of it is the record of ice. The evening is very quiet. The water doesn't move. The rock is still. There is almost no sound except the faint, soft presence of the ambient air, the low breath of the place. You can let your breathing slow to match it. The story of how this place came to be is not a short story. It covers hundreds of millions of years in its earliest chapters, and then it slows down, the way a river slows when it reaches flat ground, into the last 2 million years, where most of the visible work was done. The rock itself is the oldest part. The dark gray stone in these walls, this particular kind of hard, crystalline rock, formed deep in the crust of the earth, under enormous pressure and heat, perhaps 1 billion years ago. It was once buried under many kilometers of younger rock. Over immense spans of time, the younger rock above it eroded away, and this older, harder rock was gradually exposed at the surface. By the time the ice came, these rocks were already ancient. They had been mountains before. They had been worn down and lifted again, and worn down again. The ice found them in roughly the shape they are now, a high, rugged coastline, cut by river valleys running down to the sea. The ice came and went and came again, many times. Over the last 2 million years, the climate of this part of the world has swung back and forth between cold periods and warmer ones. In the cold periods, the glacial periods, ice built up on the high ground. It built up slowly, more snow falling each winter than melted each summer, year after year, century after century, until the accumulated snow compressed under its own weight into ice, and the ice began to flow. Ice flows. This is not immediately obvious. Ice seems solid, seems fixed, but under sufficient pressure and depth, ice moves. It moves very slowly, but it moves. It moves downhill, following the path of least resistance, which is usually the path that a river has already cut. The glacier followed the old river valleys down toward the coast. As it moved, it carried things. Embedded in the base of the glacier, in the ice closest to the rock, were fragments of stone, sand grains, pebbles, boulders, everything the ice had plucked from the ground upstream. These fragments were dragged along the valley floor and the valley walls. They scraped, they ground, they polished some surfaces and gouged others. The scratches you can see on the rock wall to your left, those long, shallow grooves, were made by stones locked in the base of a moving glacier. dragged across the rock face over many thousands of years. The stones that made them are long gone, carried further on, deposited somewhere downstream. But the grooves remain. The glacier did not carve this valley in one pass. It came and went many times. Each glacial period lasted tens of thousands of years. In between, the warmer interglacial periods, the ice retreated, sometimes completely, sometimes only partially. The valley would have looked, in those warmer intervals, something like it looks now. A river running down the middle, green on the valley floor, rock walls above. But then the cold came back, and the ice returned, and the work continued. Each time the glacier moved through, it deepened the valley a little. It widened it. It smoothed the walls. A river valley, carved by water alone, tends to be V-shaped, steep at the bottom, where the water concentrates its energy, and narrowing as it goes down. A glacier is different. A glacier fills the valley from wall to wall. Its erosive force is spread across the entire floor and lower walls. Over many passes, the V becomes a U. The bottom flattens. The walls become nearly vertical. The valley becomes the shape of the valley behind you. The glacier also did something unusual at the coast. As it moved toward the sea, it was still thick, hundreds of meters of ice, pressing down on the valley floor with enormous weight. The weight of the ice depressed the rock beneath it, and the erosive power of the ice at this depth was still very great. The glacier carved deeply, right down to and beyond the coastline. In some places, it carved the valley floor below the level of the surrounding sea. When the ice eventually retreated, when the last glacial period ended, roughly 10 to 15,000 years ago, the sea came in. It filled the valley from the coast inward. It filled the deep trough the glacier had carved. The sea rose too, as the ice sheets melted across the whole of the northern world, adding water to the oceans. The combination, deep valley, rising sea, produced the fjord. The sea simply occupied the space the glacier had made. This is why the fjord is so deep. The glacier had been working at the floor for a very long time, pressing down, grinding, removing rock. The water you are looking at now fills a space that was once solid stone, then ice, then open air, and is now the sea. The walls hold the record of all of this. If you could read rock the way you might read a page, the walls of this fjord would tell you a great deal. The polished surfaces, the ones that catch the light and seem almost smooth, were polished by the base of the glacier, by the fine-grained rock flour that the ice ground from the bedrock and then dragged along like sandpaper. Rock flour is exactly what it sounds like. Rock ground so fine it becomes a powder, suspended in the meltwater at the base of the glacier, coating everything. Where rock flour was pressed between the moving ice and the stationary wall, it polished the wall to a sheen. The grooves are different. The grooves were made by larger fragments, pebbles or angular pieces of harder rock, locked into the base of the ice and dragged across the surface. Each groove records the direction the ice was moving. The grooves on the wall to your left run roughly toward the sea, which is where the glacier was going. You can trace the direction of something that happened 20,000 years ago by looking at a scratch in the rock. There are also places on the walls where the rock has been plucked rather than scraped. Plucking is a different process, where meltwater at the base of the glacier seeped into cracks in the bedrock and then refroze. It expanded. The expansion pried fragments of rock loose from the wall or floor. The glacier then carried those fragments away. Plucking tends to produce rougher, more angular surfaces, the kind you can see higher up on the walls, where the ice was thinner and moved differently than at the base. The combination of plucking and abrasion gave the walls their varied texture, smooth and striated in some places, rough and stepped in others. The rounded stones in the riverbed behind you, the oval gray stones in the thin river, are glacial erratics and reworked glacial debris. Some of them were carried from high in the mountains, from rock formations that don't exist anywhere near the valley floor. The glacier picked them up far upstream and deposited them here when it melted. The river has since rounded them further, rolling them against each other season by season. But their presence in this valley, this far from their origin, is another record of the ice. Since the ice left, the land has been slowly rising. When the glacier was here, its weight pressed the crust of the earth downward, the same way a heavy object presses into a soft surface. When the ice melted, the weight was removed. The crust began to rebound. It is still rebounding. In parts of the northern coast, the land is rising by a centimeter or two every decade. Over thousands of years, this adds up. Old shorelines, beaches and tide lines from just after the ice retreated are now meters above the current sea level, stranded high on the hillsides. You can sometimes see them, a faint horizontal terrace on the valley wall, too regular to be natural erosion, the ghost of a shoreline from a time when the sea was here and the land was lower. The fjord itself will not last forever. The river behind you is bringing sediment down from the mountains, fine silt, sand, small stones. It deposits this sediment at the head of the fjord, where the river meets the sea. Over thousands of years, the sediment builds up. The head of the fjord shallows. Eventually, in a very long time, longer than it takes to think about comfortably, the fjord will fill in at its inner end, becoming first a shallow bay, then a marsh, then dry land. The river will have reclaimed what the glacier once gave to the sea, but that is a long way off. For now, the water is deep and still, and the walls stand as they have stood since the ice left, and the grooves in the rock record a cold, slow, enormous continuous movement that is finished. Come back to where you are standing. The edge of the fjord, the dark water in front of you, flat and deep, the walls on either side rising almost vertically, their surfaces smooth in places, grooved in places, patched with lichen and moss. The thin river behind you, moving quietly over its bed of rounded stones. The smear of snow on the high ground at the valley's far end. The sky above the fjord has gone darker now. The pale strip of sky between the walls is the color of pewter. The reflections in the water have deepened. The far wall, mirrored in the surface of the fjord, is barely distinguishable from its own reflection. The world is very symmetrical here, very still. The temperature has dropped a little, the way it does in the evening on a northern coast, when the rock stops radiating the day's warmth and the air over the water cools quickly. You can feel it on your face, a clean cold without any edge to it, the kind of cold that simply is, that doesn't ask anything of you. The fjord doesn't ask anything of you either. It has been here for 10,000 years, since the sea came in and filled the space the glacier left. It will be here long after. It is not waiting for anything. It is not going anywhere. It is simply the shape the land has in this place, at this time, the record of ice and water and slow, enormous work, resting now in the dark. If your mind has wandered, let it wander. There is nothing here that requires your attention. The water is still whether you watch it or not. The grooves in the rock face hold their record whether anyone reads them or not. The land is rising, a millimeter at a time, whether anyone measures it or not. You are not on duty. You haven't been on duty for a long time. The day was what it was. You carried it as far as you needed to. You can set it down here at the edge of the water and let the fjord hold it for a while. The fjord is very good at holding things. It has been holding the shape of an ice age for 10,000 years. Your breath is slow, your body is heavy. The rock under your feet is cold and solid and very, very old. The water in front of you is dark and still and very deep. The walls around you have been standing since before anyone was here to see them, and they will keep standing. If you'd like more of these, you can follow along quietly. The button is just below this video. Sleep well. The fjord holds the dark. The water is still. The walls are still. The grooves in the rock are still. Those long, shallow marks that a moving glacier left, dragging stone across stone in the cold, in the dark, a very long time ago. The land is rising very slowly in the dark, a millimeter at a time, going nowhere in particular, just up gently, the way a body rises when a weight is lifted from it. The snow on the high ground is very still. The river moves quietly over its smooth